Hello, everyone. My topic for my research paper is on Hurricane Katrina, um, racism revealed. Um, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast of the U.S. in August of 2005, causing damage and deaths in several different states along the coast. Um, and the most damage and death was in New Orleans and in Louisiana. Um, and almost 1,600 people died in Louisiana because of the massive flooding in the area. Um, the levees that were supposed to pump water out of the area were designed for up to a Category 3 storm. And since Katrina was actually a Category 5 storm, the levees could not withstand the amount of water that was coming from the storm. And it's also believed by a lot of people that there were major design flaws in the construction of the levees. So obviously they weren't working there the way they were supposed to. Um, the majority of people who died in Louisiana due to Hurricane Katrina were African American, um, and many of them were actually elderly people who couldn't get away from the flooding because they weren't able to evacuate. So within my paper, um, I would like to explore how Hurricane Katrina revealed racism that was already present in the state of Louisiana, and also how racism was revealed because of the slow response to help the people in New Orleans. Um, I also will be looking at the media's portrayal of African Americans. Um, Many major networks were saying African Americans were looting and that there was murders and all kinds of bad stuff going on. Um, when in reality, many of them were just trying to help each other survive. And one story I had read was that a man, he admitted that he went into a Walmart and took stuff, but he was taking food for his family. He wasn't stealing anything other than what his family needed. And he actually said he actually made a list of the stuff so that he could pay it back later. So obviously, um, a lot of people were not being portrayed the way, and being portrayed in the wrong way. And yes, they were taking things, but when it comes down to it, um, if it means that we're gonna stay alive, obviously, a lot of us will probably do it. Um, uh, for the results, when trying to look on the databases for the university library, um, I first just looked up Hurricane Katrina and there was a lot of stuff. So obviously I had to narrow that down a little bit. So I added racism and that did narrow it down a little bit, but there's still a lot of articles. Um, I also use media because I want to look at how the media portrayed African Americans um, after the hurricane hit. And my 5 scholarly articles, I actually have found 19 that I thought would all be good. Um, but since I only have to talk about 5, I'm obviously not going to talk about all 19. Um, but they were all found on the university's library's online database. And the first one is called Hurricane Katrina Linked Environmental Injustice, Race, Class, and Place Differentials and Attitudes. And that's by Francis O. Adiola, J. Stephen Picow, and they're both professors of sociology. And they look at environmental injustice, human neglect, and racism, um, and say key determinants of Katrina-induced environmental injustice attitudes among survivors in severely affected counties in Louisiana and Mississippi. Um, 3 years into their recovery process. So they're actually looking after, like, a few years after it actually happened. And then the next one is perceptions of racism in Hurricane Katrina. a liberation psychology analysis. This is by Glenn Adams, Laurie T. O'Brien, and Jessica C. Nelson, and they're all professors at several different universities. Um, and they look at how African Americans perceived more racism in response to Hurricane Katrina than did white Americans, and they go on a lot about that. And then the next is race, place, and environment in the aftermath of Katrina. And this is by Beverly Wright, and she is the executive director at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. She examines the impact of race, place, and environment on the unequal distribution of recovery resources for African American communities in the city of New Orleans. Um, Pretty much just saying how they just weren't really prepared, and even when they were giving out the much needed supplies, there just wasn't enough going around. Um, and the next is institutional discrimination, individual racism, and Hurricane Katrina. And this is by Kristen Henkel, John DeVidio, and Samuel Gartner. And they're all professors at different universities as well. Um, and they look at the potential roles of institutional discrimination, subtle contemporary biases, and racial mistrust. And they are looking more at both sides to see if race really did play a role after the hurricane. And then my last source that I was looking at is called Came Hell and High Water: The Interest of Hurricane Katrina, the News Media, Race, and Poverty. And this really goes into the media, so I think this one will really help me. And suggests this is by Court Voorhees, John Bick, and Douglas Perkins. Um, and so they suggest that media often represents minorities in a negative light, ultimately reinforcing existing social inequalities. And this is just in general. So obviously, within their article, it's more about how after the hurricane it got worse. Um, and they examine the portrayal of minority groups in the media during and after the storm. So, um, the only thing I'm really confused about is how I'm going to order my paper, like the format for it, as in what topics I want to start with, like if I want to start with media first, or um, just, I don't know. I'm really going to have to think about it. But this is everything I have so far, so thank you for watching.